I still remember the sea that morning, cold, metallic, and endless. It was June 6, 1944, though at the time the date meant little more than a mark on the map of a vast, grinding war. We had called it Operation Overlord. History would come to call it D-Day. The night before, the English coast had been a living machine. I walked among rows of landing craft, where soldiers smoked in silence, helmets tipped low against drizzle. Overhead, the sky pulsed with the drone of C-47 transports carrying paratroopers toward the darkness of France. Somewhere beyond the Channel, Rommel's Atlantic wall waited. Concrete, steel, and artillery aimed at the narrow beaches of Normandy. General Eisenhower had made the decision only hours earlier. The weather had been foul for days, but a brief break in the storm offered a fragile window. "Okay," he had said, his voice steady despite the gamble. "Let's go." Those two words unleashed the largest amphibious invasion the world had ever seen. Nearly 156,000 men, 7,000 ships, and 11,000 aircraft converging on a 50-mile stretch of French coastline. From the bridge of a command vessel, I watched dawn bleed into gray. The first waves of assault craft were specks on a restless sea. Radio chatter crackled: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, 5 codenamed beaches that would define the day's fate. The plan was a masterpiece of coordination. American forces on the western flank, British and Canadian divisions on the east, airborne drops inland to seize bridges and block reinforcements. Yet even the finest plans trembled before reality. The Channel heaved beneath us. Men clutched their rifles, green-faced with seasickness. Some prayed, others stared blankly, mouths moving without sound. We could see the French coast now, low bluffs, scattered villages, and smoke from the naval bombardment that had already begun. The air smelled of cordite and salt. I moved below deck to the communications room. Reports came fast and conflicting. British paratroopers from the 6th Airborne had landed near the Caen Canal and Orne River bridges. Pegasus Bridge, they called it later, and were holding their ground despite heavy fire. To the west, the American 101st and 82nd Airborne were scattered across hedgerows near Sainte-Mère-Église. Some units had landed miles off target, yet they were fighting to seize crossroads and towns before dawn fully arrived. When I surfaced again, the sea was alive with tracers. Battleships Texas and Arkansas thundered from the horizon, hurling shells that tore at German fortifications. The sound was a deep rolling fury that shook the bones. Landing craft crept closer, tiny exposed rectangles on a vast grey plain. I could make out soldiers crouched behind steel ramps, knuckles white, faces pale under their helmets. Then came the first blow of reality. At Omaha Beach, everything went wrong. From our vantage, we could see smoke and chaos. Strong currents had pushed the assault craft east of their intended zones. Many tanks sank before reaching shore. German machine gun nests on the bluffs opened fire with lethal precision. The radio filled with clipped voices, pinned down, casualties heavy. "Need engineers." Each word was a heartbeat of desperation. I heard one officer mutter, "God help them." On the sand, men waded through surf choked with obstacles and bodies. Some never made it out of the water. Others clawed forward inch by inch, hiding behind shattered ramps and steel hedgehogs. The smell of cordite mixed with the sea's brine, a scent no one ever forgets. Naval gunfire shifted closer, pounding the cliffs until the air seemed to vibrate. At Utah Beach, luck favored the Americans. The current had carried them 2,000 yards south of their planned landing zone, ironically, to a place less heavily defended. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., fils de fille, the oldest man to wade ashore that day, famously declared, "We'll start the war from right here." Within hours, Utah was secure enough for vehicles to roll inland. Farther east, the British 50th Division fought across Gold Beach, under relentless fire. I heard through the static that engineers were clearing mines, creating gaps for tanks fitted with flails and fascines. Odd contraptions conceived by the brilliant, eccentric Major General Hobart. Canadians at Juno Beach faced high tides and concrete bunkers, but pushed through with remarkable ferocity. By midday, they had advanced deeper than any other Allied force. On Sword Beach, British troops, alongside French commandos under Kiefer, pressed toward Caen, yet it was Omaha that haunted everyone. For hours, the beach was a slaughter ground. I remember watching medics crawl through surf to drag the wounded back, bullets striking the water like rain. Slowly, painfully, leadership emerged from the chaos. Small groups of survivors, led by junior officers and sergeants, began to scale the bluffs. By afternoon, they had silenced key gun positions. One radio message crackled through, "We're off the beach." Those 4 words marked the turning point. By evening, I moved inland with a forward unit near Vierville. The terrain was a maze of hedgerows, ancient earthen walls that offered both cover and deadly ambush points. We passed through villages half ruined by bombardment. French civilians emerged from cellars, eyes wide, whispering, "Les Américains, les Anglais?" Their disbelief mingled with joy. For them, liberation had come riding on steel waves. In the command tent that night, maps lay spread under lamplight. Eisenhower's staff updated front lines with red pencils. Montgomery coordinated the British advance toward Caen. Intelligence officers tracked German movements. Rommel was away visiting his wife for her birthday when the invasion began. But by the next day, the Wehrmacht's 7th Army was scrambling to mount a counterattack. Hitler, still convinced Normandy was a diversion, withheld panzer divisions that might have crushed the beachhead. Fate turned on such misjudgments. I stepped outside to breathe. The air was thick with smoke and the faint tang of burning oil. Beyond the horizon, the channel glowed with the reflection of hundreds of ships still arriving. Each one carried supplies, reinforcements, and the fragile promise that this foothold would not be lost. Over the next days, the beaches transformed into bustling ports. Mulberry harbors assembled like floating cities, pipelines snaking under the sea to pump fuel from Britain. But the cost was terrible. More than 4,000 Allied soldiers lay dead, and thousands more wounded or missing. The sand of Normandy turned crimson in places, washed clean only by the relentless tide. I wrote notes that night for the after-action report, but stopped midway, unable to capture the scope of it. How do you quantify courage? How do you describe a boy who runs through gunfire to pull a comrade from the surf, knowing he might die doing it? Over the next weeks, Operation Overlord unfolded far beyond that single day. The capture of Carentan linked Omaha and Utah, securing a continuous American front. British and Canadian divisions fought grinding battles around Caen, where the Germans defended every field and farmhouse. Air support from the Allies pounded enemy lines. The sky never truly went silent. The Bocage country tested both sides, each hedgerow a fortress, each village a fight for inches. I moved among different units, recording their progress. In the 82nd Airborne Sector, I saw paratroopers who had jumped alone at night, now leading entire companies through the maze of Norman lanes. In a makeshift field hospital, I watched surgeons work by lamplight, their hands steady despite exhaustion. They spoke little. The rhythm of war was its own language. By early July, the Allies had landed more than 1 million men and 500,000 tons of supplies. The beachhead was secure. From this bridgehead would come the liberation of Paris, the crossing of the Rhine, and ultimately the fall of the Third Reich. Still, the memory of that first dawn lingered. Sometimes when the wind carried the scent of salt and smoke, I could hear again the rumble of distant guns and the cries of men calling out across the surf. War has a way of burning itself into the soul. No matter how far one travels afterward, part of you remains on that beach. Years later, historians would analyze Operation Overlord as a triumph of planning and logistics, Eisenhower's gamble that succeeded through courage and coordination. They would speak of deception plans like Operation Bodyguard and Fortitude South, which convinced the Germans the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. They would praise the engineers who turned beaches into harbors, the pilots who flew through flak to drop paratroopers, and the sailors who braved mines to bring men ashore. All of it true, and yet none of it captures what it felt like to stand there at the edge of history. Because in the end, it wasn't only strategy that won Normandy, it was human endurance. It was the sergeant shouting for his men to move when fear froze them, the medic who waded back into surf for the 5th time, the French villager who offered water to strangers in muddy uniforms, the chaplain kneeling beside the dying, whispering prayers amid thunder. On the anniversary years later, I returned to those beaches. The cliffs of Pointe du Hoc still bore the scars of bombardment, craters now filled with grass and flowers. Children ran where men once fell. The sea was calm, deceptively ordinary. Standing there, I tried to reconcile the serenity with the memory of chaos. Perhaps that is the truest victory. To see life reclaim what death once held, Operation Overlord was more than a military success. It was a declaration that tyranny could be fought and overcome, no matter how fortified its walls. It united nations, armies, and ordinary people under a single purpose. The invasion of Normandy marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, but it also marked the rebirth of hope for an entire continent. As the tide came in, erasing footprints from the sand, I thought of the men who never left that shore. They did not live to see victory parades or hear the cheers in liberated cities, yet their courage wrote the first chapter of peace. History will remember generals and maps and strategies, but those who were there know that the real story was written in salt water, steel, and unyielding will. I turned back toward the sea, the horizon glowing with twilight. The same waters that once carried us to war now shimmered quietly under the evening sky, and I thought, perhaps for the first time in years, despite everything, humanity's capacity for sacrifice still outweighed its capacity for destruction. That was the true legacy of Operation Overlord, the day when, against impossible odds, faith in freedom crossed the Channel and landed on the shores of Normandy.